introductions of ourselves. I'm Breeana Loveland. I work for Nebo School District. I'm not currently on a UAT team. And I am an SLP and an ATP. Robert.
I'm Robert Woodbury. Is my mic working? Okay, awesome. I'm the Assistive Technology Coordinator for the Cache County School District and the UAT team leader up there. Also, if I could be any G.I. Joe character, I would of course be Snake Eyes, which is why that's there. Anyway, anyone else grow up on G.I. Joe? Oh, we got two. Okay.
In the back.
Very nice. Okay.
And I didn't know we were choosing G.I. Joe characters, so I just chose a superhero, Captain Marvel. Robert told me to put my tiny face on an action figure, so I did it.
It looks quite convincing, doesn't it? Anyway, moving on. Sorry.
So the learning outcomes, what we are hoping to be able to do after this session, one big one is to be able to discuss the Communication Bill of Rights and be able to identify how we can incorporate that in our setting. Also, we're going to give you by the end of the session some tools to help with the autonomy and self-determination of clients, and then be able to apply this information for the people that you work with. So basically, our goal is to be able to talk about person-centered strategies for working with our students.
Okay, so who do we have in the room? Let's see, SLPs. SLPs, okay, OT, PT, awesome. Classroom teachers. Anyone else?
Parents.
Parents.
Nice.
Administrators, etc. Awesome. Okay. So we would like to know from you guys if there's anything in particular we're hoping to get going into this presentation. You obviously saw communication in the title. When is it enough? Anything that we can make sure we want to cover from you guys? And if you're not answering out loud, hopefully you're thinking right now, like, why did I go into this? What am I hoping to get out of this? So before we share, just take time to reflect on that. And I want you to think for a second, why are you here? Most of us here at an assistive technology conference that this is not part of our regular job to be here. We had to make some kind of arrangements to leave our outside job or outside life and come here instead. And there was probably a student that got you into this, or maybe a student that is keeping you here that you're thinking about. So we want you to think about that. Who's your muse? You know, what's your purpose for being here? And bring that into this presentation. That will help you a lot.
Perfect. So getting started, again, with that idea of person-centered communication, I've done this presentation a couple of different times, a couple different conferences. Robert and I have teamed up for this round. And every time I do this presentation, I kind of think about, okay, what is the main thing that we're trying to impress upon people, right? Like, why are we doing this? And I think the idea is we all want to be person-centered, right? It's easy to say, hey, the child is the most important thing. Our students are the most important thing. And we're, I'm making my decisions about the child. But like any ethical situation that we find ourselves in, sometimes that's easier said than done. And so this becomes complicated. And so our idea with ethics is when is it fine enough? When do we have enough communication? When are we done? When is there enough of anything? And who gets to make that decision, right? Are we as the professionals making that decision? Families, and how can we get the kid involved with making that decision for themselves? So a couple just quick overviews of ethics. So the original ethical code for a lot of things was the medical ethics, right? And we have these ideas of, hey, autonomy, them being able to decide for themselves. Also the duty to do good, not do harm. This is where we first kind of started seeing where, hey, the patient should be the most important thing for us. And then as we go into other ethical codes, we have NEA, And we've highlighted a lot of these codes. There's a lot of different things that we should be doing with our jobs, right? And every different job, OT, PT, we all have our own ethical code. But one thing that we have in common with all of these is the student or the person, right? Help the student realize his or her potential as a worthy, effective member of society. In NEA, then here in ASHA, we have to hold paramount the welfare of persons, right? These are the first things that we should be doing. And that's kind of preaching to the choir, right? So that comes into the Communication Bill of Rights, which I think is Robert's slide. But one thing I'm going to say about that, all of those different ethical groups that we've talked about, they all have to make their own code for each, PTs are going to follow this, ATPs are going to follow this. The one thing that everybody could agree on was this, because this document came from all of those groups getting together and deciding, hey, what should we be working on as far as communication? So Robert.
Yeah, so unfortunately, this slide is way too small for you guys to see in this room, and it might be too small for you to see online as well. We have that QR code there that you can scan. And I'm not even going to try to do any Zoom on this because we don't want to mess up the Zoom by Zooming. But the Communication Bill of Rights is all about the fact that people should have certain rights in the way that they express themselves and communicate. That they should be able to communicate for themselves and not be communicated about, not have other people make decisions for them. There's a lot of different things. There's choice and autonomy in there. So you can look this up. In fact, we're going to take just a minute. Are you guys able to scan this code from where you are? Okay. So what we'd like for you to do is take just a minute to scan that and glance through that and find something that resonates with you. It's so small on my screen, I'm going to have to take a picture too.
Get really close.
So as you're looking through that, we are going to ask for brave people to share, and we do have awesome Star Wars AT buttons up here to bribe you with.
I'm pretty sure these are unique to this room, but I'm not 100% sure, but maybe.
As far as you know, they are.
As far as I know, they are. They're special. Allison. Like something that yeah.
Hold on, I'm going to bring a mic around.
Robert's
for the
running.
online folks.
I'm going to throw a button at you because I did not run.
The first time I read this, which has been a while ago, the part that I loved was like, it talks about you have the right to refuse and you have the right to have an option that still might not be able to be acknowledged or, achieved at that point. Because a lot of times we're working with them, the teachers are like, well, just take that off their communication device. It's not an option. I know they like it, but it's not something you can have. I'm like, nope, they still get to ask about it. And then we can talk about how that's not something we can do right now or they don't have it right now. So we always are talking about what we want them to say, but they might not want to say that. So I love that part.
Absolutely. One thing while Robert's coming up, and if anybody else has something.
We got two more back here. Go for it,
back
Bree.
there, go for it.
Okay.
I just didn't know if you would
you're
have a long
closer.
walk.
Awesome. So I liked the right number 3, the right to be addressed directly and not be spoken for or talked about as if they weren't there. I see that a lot. That happens. We have students in wheelchairs and stuff that they like. I will ask them a question and then their one-on-one aide will answer for them. But I always wait for the student because I ask them a question, not the aide.
Absolutely. That's the one I was going to bring up actually. And talking to the student like, hey, I'm talking to you and maybe I want the aide to get this information so they can listen to us talk, and they'll get it that way. But I'm talking to you like you're the person. There's one back here and then we'll come up front.
Mine was hers, but the second one was basically the cultural and linguistically appropriate. Because there's so many like slang words or there's so many different things that their peers are saying, but sometimes we don't give them those options of saying those same type of phrases, or maybe they want to, giving them the option of saying what they would like that's culturally appropriate for the situation they're in, or, in their communities and all of those things.
Absolutely.
I don't know if these are all appropriate or if this is something we can actually put on a communication board, but I know this is what they want to say, because whenever the other students say those phrases, the person turns, totally gazes with, like, she knew that was the phrases they wanted to say. And I was so happy when the teacher came to us and said, "Can we do this? Is it appropriate?" And I said, "Oh yes, please." And she wanted to make sure that we had several ways for the student to refuse, to say, "Go away, leave me alone, get out of my space, don't touch me." And it was their voice, not my voice, not the teacher's voice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm going to come up and give you the microphone so Robert doesn't have to run all the way.
I love the first one, the right to dignity and respect in all interactions.
Yeah, right. I mean, these are the basic things, right? We all just want to be respected. We all want to interact. We want to be able to say what we want to say. Holly, I'm running to you, Holly.
I really like the one about making choices from meaningful options, because I think we give our students choices all the time, but like we decide what choices they get to have, like kind of what was said before, but like just making sure that the choices that they have are meaningful on their lives and not like just, whatever. We're like, oh, we can't give them that choice because they can't have it. I hear that a lot. But if that's what they want, they should be able to express that.
Yeah. And then maybe we're telling them, hey, they can't have that, right? That goes along with that executive functioning. It's like Paige is saying, hey, if we can't have things, that's still a thing we need to learn. So we still need to be able to ask for those things. We still need to be able to say negative things and learn why we can't say those things, right?
My absolute favorite AAC story of all time is about a student with pretty intact cognitive skills, was nonverbal, got a device, and the first place he took it was to the dentist, and he found the "this sucks" button. He was able to mash that button repeatedly while the dentist was ramming around in his mouth. None of us get to do that as verbal people, right? But I love that story so much.
I had a similar one of my favorites. I got one of the technicians from a classroom come to my speech room, very upset, and told me, "Oh my goodness, the kid just called the teacher a teacher witch. We need you to take witch off the device because she's really mad." And I, went and told him, "Hey, you can't take witch off. Maybe don't be a witch," but no, I didn't say that. Maybe teach him not to call you a witch. I mean, there's some options, right? So yeah, we can't take those things away. We have that autonomy to do those things. Awesome.
These are great discussions that you could have in your teams too.
Yes.
So, and this goes right along with that, with the right to dignity, is I've seen this so many times when I walk into a classroom with verbal and nonverbal students. They actually, if you don't think about it as a teacher, but they get treated very differently. Every time a verbal student says something, it's responded to, whether it's positive or negative. That doesn't happen a lot of times with our nonverbal AAC users, right? They don't get the same level of attention and interaction. And a lot of times I'll have this teachers ask me, "Oh, well, what if Johnny does this with his device? What if Johnny says this with his device?" And the question that I ask them a lot of times is, well, what would you do if Sammy did the same thing with his voice? If they're blurting out, if they're saying random stuff that doesn't make sense, we don't know if it's stimming or exploring or whatever, but we should treat that like it's verbal language the same way.
Yeah. Just because it's not related, a lot of our blurters are saying things that are not related. Again, going back to that executive functioning. And so that doesn't mean it's not something that they actually didn't mean to say.
And also, it's really good to remember that every single student in school does two forms of main communication. They are communicating during the school day. They're also responding during the school day. So you think about any neurotypical non-disabled kid, verbal kid, along with anyone on the any kind of spectrum anywhere. Communication is sharing the things that are in your heart and in your head, your thoughts, your feelings, your needs. Responding is giving an answer to a question. And usually it's an expected response. Sometimes it could be an open response, but not always. They're both important in school. Teachers need to have students respond to questions, to commands, to all of that. But students should also have the chance to be able to communicate. And what happens a lot of times is I walk into classrooms and I see that a student with an AAC device has been taught to respond, like maybe during rug time or during snack time. And we think that's communication, and it is, but that's not all of communication. That's one part of it. So who gets to decide how much is enough? If they can respond to certain things appropriately, is that enough? Also, I've got a QR code up here. If you want to explore the communication versus responding in more depth, our district, we have a very, very small YouTube channel with like 5 videos. So Paige Buckingham has doubled our output. But there's a deep dive video where we just went into that. And I will share that with teachers sometimes that I walk in and they think that their students are doing great because they're responders, but maybe they're not quite communicators yet. Does that make sense? So.
And also, is there more than just telling people what we want? Going into that as well. So next, okay. So like I said at the beginning, this can get really complicated. So we kind of laid the groundwork with some of those things. And now we're going to talk about some real situations where for ourselves so that this has kind of got complicated, right? Because we always want to say we're being person-centered, that we're doing what we need to. So this is one of the students that I was working with. He was in the post-high program at our district, and he was attempting to communicate verbally. He had about 1 or 2 words, wasn't able to read. No AT was being used at the time. So mom had been asking at different IEP meetings multiple times, hey, can we try something? Can we do something more? The school team hadn't been responding to that. And so mom, through Voc Rehab, put in a referral to UAT. And so this was really interesting because I was on the UAT team at the time, and I got contacted by Austin and Julia, and they said, hey, we got this referral. Why haven't you guys taken care of it in-house? And so we had to do some looking into, what had been happening in that regard. So one thing I did that I, don't always do, but with this student, the big thing was work. Mom wants him to be able to have a job. Student wants to be able to gain those work skills. So I went with him on a workplace observation, and it was a gas station. And he's a great worker. He was able to do things, but there's this student plus another student. The other student could read and would then tell him, hey, okay, this is what we need to do. And he was great at going with the other student and doing those tasks. But when it came down to that student not being there with him, he couldn't work, he couldn't function. So we were going through, and then they got to the point where they were supposed to be changing trash outside. We ran out of trash bags. So the one student was still outside gathering the trash, and this student, SR, goes back into the gas station, and we need to get more trash bags. And I'm just watching, trying to help him. We're starting to trial maybe Prolo. It was Prolo Quo to go at this time, and also seeing AI. And so for him being able to ask for the trash bags, we couldn't do that. He could say trash bags. So he could go up to the attendant and say trash bags, but we weren't getting trash bags. He didn't know we were out of trash bags. I need trash bags. Where are the trash bags? And then another thing happened with this in the vacuum. We were supposed to, the next step, other student tells him, hey, we need to go vacuum. We don't know where the vacuum is. So all he could do is go to the attendant and say vacuum. But we couldn't say, hey, I need the vacuum, or the vacuum's broken. So I went back to the school and told this to the teacher, and he told me, hey, he could say vacuum, that should be fine enough. And so this is kind of where our title came from. This, like, is saying vacuum, having that one word, is that really fine enough? He couldn't say what he needed to do his work. So then we ran into some other significant problems, because we are working at a gas station and we have this iPad, but how is he supposed to do his work plus carry the iPad around? So he did pretty well advocating for a phone. Then we had issues with, Voc Rehab doesn't pay for phones, so then is Voc Rehab the one deciding what he gets, so we talk to parents, we get a phone. That's an old phone. We put on Go Talk everywhere because that was free, and seeing AI for him to trial. And then the next time I followed up with the school, they had told me he's not using it because he doesn't want to. And so I told him, well, how are we teaching him how to use this, right? He's 18. He doesn't want to be seen as different from all of the other students in the class. Have we put Seeing AI, it's a free app. Have we put it on all of the iPads in the class? Have we made an assignment to where we can use this and everybody's using it? Have we tried something universal design? So as I was going through with this, then we got the question of, okay, well, he doesn't want to do it and you're trying to make him do it. Why are you taking away his autonomy? And so then we come into, this discussion of informed choice, right? Of have we given him every option to learn how to use this to make that choice in an informed way? And so again, this is a lot of information, but mainly to say, like, this was complicated, right? Because he is in his way choosing, hey, I don't want to do this, but how can we balance that autonomy, that independence, and make that decision? So that's kind of setting our stage for these more tricky things. Another student, that's a lot of me talking. This student, I'm gonna tell you about this one a little bit, and then we're going to do an activity where you guys see what you think we should do next. So EP, he was a middle school student, and in our district, we had also had a long time where we weren't sending iPads home for use at the house for summer, even for overnight. So we had just got the district to agree that we could start sending iPads home. And so we were super excited. And so I was contacting parents, telling them, hey, it's summer's coming up. You're going to get to have this. And so when we told the parents, hey, you can take this home for the summer, this is going to be great, they said, no, we don't want that. And this was a time where, for me, thinking, hey, the best thing for the student is that he needs this iPad at home. And so then I had to take another time to think about, okay, what's the best, what are we doing here that's person-centered? Because I think he needs the iPad at home. And parents are telling me, hey, we just want him to be happy. And if we bring this home, is he still going to be happy? So I want you guys to get into small groups, talk about this. Let us know, what you think. What would you do next? We'll take
So find someone next to you. Yeah.
We can get a timer, a page timer up here. It's been 2 minutes.
Or talk to yourself if you're that kind of
Think
person.
through it, yeah.
Those are some of my best conversations.
Next is independent versus autonomy.
Buttons and run.
Yeah. Get ready for ideas.
Okay, about 30 seconds left, helping you with your planning. Okay, guys, we're coming back.
Yeah. Is there any groups that want to share what they kind of thought they would do next? There's still some discussions in the back. Anybody thoughts on what we should do? Right up here. We'll
but let them have that choice of whether or not they're going to take it.
Yeah.
We also talk that depends on age of the student too. How's that going to affect it?
Sure. Okay, back up at the front. So this group is saying, hey, we need to ask the student, and then also, take into account the age and communication style at home. Let's come to.
One thing that I've run into this year with one of my students is we can communicate with them. We know what a few things are, but tools like this allow him to communicate with people that don't know him as well. And so kind of stressing that to the parents, yeah, it's great that you know he's happy, but how does he communicate that to other people that don't know him as well?
Yeah, great.
Couple over here.
We kind of talked about, I guess, two things. Well, my recollections, two things. So one of the things is if you can explain your rationale in a non-combative way, say, hey, I hear where you're coming from as parents. We want to keep the peace. Here's my rationale. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's the reasoning why I think it's what's best for him, and make it very, very clear what your thought processes are, and maybe research or whatever it is. And I would say, look, we'll follow your lead, but this is the reasoning behind why I think it's the best for them. A lot of times when parents feel like, hey, this person really does have my kid's best interest at heart, they'll often go along with what you have to say. And then one thing that she had mentioned is breaking down the task into bite-sized, achievable processes, so that a parent is taking that and going, oh, this isn't going to be as horrible as maybe we think it might be. It's achievable, something we can do. Is that fair interpretation?
Awesome.
I work at some high schools, and so we've had to have these talks. I kind of call it where the rubber hits the road talk of, they're finishing their high school days out, and what they're finding in the research is they've studied people with disabilities and autism and stuff, and they're living longer, which is fabulous. But they're, when I tell the parents, like, you're not going to be around forever, your child can live into their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. What will their communication look like with strangers, their community, emergency providers, all of that stuff? And if they have no way, universal, robust communication system to do that with, how are they going to communicate? And where this child is doing that well on that, my heart breaks for them. And then she also had a good idea, maybe with this parent, or maybe she was saying she has a grandma that just doesn't want that stuff to come home, and maybe sending home a book that they can flip through, and then he can communicate with using the paper version, and maybe show that parent or show the grandparent, hey, like, oh yeah, they are catching on to this. Maybe we could try something like that. So
yeah, low tech. It doesn't always have to be the same thing, right? We can have different things in different places.
So a lot of, a lot of my ideas kind of have followed along that same line by talking about, okay, if you're going to take your kid out and you go to McDonald's, and they want a cheeseburger without any onions today instead of the chicken nuggets that they normally get, like, how do they communicate that to you? Like, and then how does he communicate? Like, are there siblings at home? Is he really communicating, or are they playing with him and communicating for him, and looking at all of, like, okay, break it down, like, and get maybe a little more information about why they don't want it there, or why they, like, what their thought process is. If it's just like, oh, it's just one more thing, because I get that as a parent, like, it's just one more thing to have to, like, we have to keep it charged and we have to have it, like, ready for him. Like, okay, well, what if we teach him at school, this is how you plug this in so you can charge it when you go to bed at night. Like, we're going to teach, because he's going to do that every day, right? How about, can we try sending it home, like, during the weekend or every night? And for, like, can we send it home for a couple of weeks every night, and you send it back to school, and just see how it changes? And then making a data informed decision, and be like, just kind of pay attention, and maybe, like, mark it down somewhere of their interactions with their siblings, or with the people in their home, or the people that come in, whether you have visitors or grandparents or aunts and uncles, and what they're able to say with them, and just mark down each time they have, like, an interaction with somebody that's more meaningful.
That's great. So that's a good segue into, I intentionally left some information out that might, sorry, Robert.
Oh, you go ahead. I've got something to say.
Okay,
too,
Robert
yeah.
has something to say. So more information about EP. EP comes from a family with lots of siblings. multiple siblings use the same communication device. Also, there is a relative that is a speech pathologist. So they have a lot of background actually in utilizing these things. So does that change how we talk to them? Does that change what you guys might think would be our next steps? Robert, go ahead. And then if that does change it for anybody, you can throw that in. But again, it just shows this gets more and more complicated the more we dive into some of these situations.
So as I was hearing you guys talk, I was thinking about how the human brain does this funny thing where we take limited amounts of information and we make a complete story out of it, because that's what we do. We see someone and we think we know them. And we do this with our own kids too, especially when they can't talk a whole lot and tell us who they are inside. And so sometimes one thing that we've done, so the point I'm trying to make here is sometimes we look at a student and we think we know that student, but there's more to get to know. And one thing we've done sometimes is, if we have them using it successfully at home, is to show parents a video of them using it successfully at home, because this is something they did not know about their own child. And this helps give them a more complete picture of who that person is as a person, to add to the person-centered planning.
Yeah, great. Any other thoughts on that before we head on? Okay. So that leads into this great slide, Robert.
So independence and autonomy, they are not the same thing. Independence is being able to do things without someone helping you, okay? Which is great. Autonomy is being able to do the things that you want to do. That's the easiest way for me to explain it. This slide from the AAC coach explains it a lot better, and I'm not going to go through all of that. But sometimes the idea of independence can actually get in the way of autonomy, because there are certain things that students, just because of their physical or cognitive limitations, are never going to be able to do on their own. So we need to have supports to help with, so that they can be more autonomous. And at the same time, there are people, that strike that. I don't know where I was going with that. But the point of this is that we need to think about both of them. There are students I've worked with, and we know these students, especially the ones with really, really complicated bodies, that there are just a lot of things they can't do. But we can still give them the ability to express their opinions and their wants and their needs, to have more autonomy in how they're treated and how their day looks.
Yeah. So that kind of goes into that idea. Hey, yeah, he's happy, but is he able to tell us if we go to McDonald's that he wants something different than he always gets? Independently, sure, he's fine, but is he as best as he can be? Have we given him all of those opportunities to be able to tell us who he is, what he wants, those type of things? And this also goes into that partner assisted scanning, right? Sometimes partner assisted scanning, we definitely take for granted of, hey, yeah, we're going to need a partner. We're going to need somebody to help us with this, but can I then tell you more about what I actually want and what I actually need? Yeah.
So any thoughts, questions, comments about independence and autonomy, or anything else we've talked about up to this point before we kind of move on? Bree's going to run to you.
No, you're great. You're great.
Oh, it's good for us. Go for it.
And this is maybe just more of what you're saying. I just think sometimes, I'm an occupational therapist. I often work on handwriting. What kid wants to work on handwriting? But we're helping. It's that situation of AAC. We have to find that balance of, when do we keep working on it? So they're not independent with that. And it is something that will benefit them, and it does help with their academic skills. So sometimes those are at odds with one another, that independence and autonomy. And I'm personally a believer of finding a balance between the two, saying sometimes you have to do what you don't want to do. We all do. And we're going to keep working on that independence, and hopefully you'll see the benefit from it, but then also give opportunity for autonomy, which I think sometimes we can forget.
Excellent. If I could boil down assistive technology to like one phrase, it would just be simply giving people other options. And if we give them those options, then they can choose, just like Bree talked about informed choice. The student didn't want to use it, but at least now they had the ability to reject it.
But the big point with that too is making sure that when we give them the option that they understand the option before we make the choice, right? Have we made sure that they actually, that we've talked about how this will benefit them, not just, we know how it will benefit them, but have we told them, have we included them in that discussion? Holly.
Yeah, I actually have an example of that. One of my students is a Toby eye gaze user, and he does really well at home or at school, especially talking about what he's interested in. But his family has their own way of communicating with him at home. And so even though the family wants to use the Toby at home, the student has decided right now that they prefer to communicate with using their body, which has very limited movement, but it works really well for them at home. Right now, that's what he's chosen autonomously for himself. Do I believe that in someday in the future he will use it more at home and in his environment? Yes, as I continue, like one of the hardest things is making the vocabulary meaningful at home and at school. I think that's a big thing, and putting in that fringe that we need that doesn't come standard like the core does, especially the really person specific fringe. So I think and I think it can change. Like right now, that's his autonomy for using and his choice for using his device. And he does it well and it works really well for him. But that can change in the future. And so I think those are conversations that we need to have too with people. And I'm really thankful I learned that Lydia Dolly, like when she spoke, one of her presentations that I went to, she's like, keep trying things with students because their physical abilities change, their abilities change.
Yeah, absolutely.
That I wasn't planning on saying this, but it's something, it usually sparks something that I've been thinking about all year. We talk with English language learners about this term called code switching, where we speak one language at school and another language at home. And I'm starting to realize that a lot of our students do this with AAC too. They have a way to communicate at school that's different than the way that they communicate at home. Where we go from that, I'm not sure, but it's good to be aware of that they have a system that works somewhat. And what can we do to, increase their facility with bringing the school language home as well?
Yeah, I have my afternoon session, we're talking a little bit about goals and the competencies, and that is one of them, being able to say different, having the language for different environments, different activities, and that's going to be a big thing because our environments are always going to change as we get older, as we go to new classes, as we meet new people. We may need new things and so that may be an every year thing that it's changing.
So this slide here is just another ugly question about money, which I know we love talking about, putting a price on independence and autonomy. I have a student that I've worked with for years that is very autistic and is very effective at using his iPad to communicate. He also gets very excited and likes to bash his iPad screen with a water bottle and break the screen. He broke 4 iPads in 2 years. And we had to have a discussion about, is it worth it? Of course, to me, absolutely it was. But these are things we need to think about as well. How do we decide, is it enough? How do we decide they've broken too many, you don't get words anymore? So I think there's just something else to think about. We can move on from that.
Yeah, just what is best for that person. And yes. This is one, again, thinking back to the person, the reason why we're here, thinking about somebody from your caseload who might benefit from this as we get ready to move into some of the other tools that we have. So SETT, a lot of us have maybe heard from SETT. Who's heard of SETT in the room? Awesome. So not everybody, but a lot. Who is actively using SETT? And who's actively using SETT well? Okay, so the SETT framework, Joy Zabala came and did a presentation on that 3 UAT conferences ago. Yeah, the QR code is great. You can go to this. And the idea was that we use this.
Also, you guys, all of these slides should be on the Sketch if you're on the Sketch app, so you can get those later.
Yes, absolutely. So since there's some that have never heard of SETT, we're going to go into this a little bit. So basically it's divided into the S is the student, the E is the environments that they're in, T is tasks, and the other T, the end T is tools and strategies. So the biggest way that we misuse SETT is by deciding the last T first, right? So when Zabala made this, the last T, the tools, was intended to be the last thing that we think about. Okay, so the first thing we should be thinking about, the S, is the student, right? And when we fill this out, we're not just thinking about what we need, we're thinking about strengths and weaknesses, right? So we're thinking, okay, what do we know about this student as far as the strengths and weaknesses? Also, what do we need to know? So when we take this into a classroom, Julia is, if you have questions about this, amazing at this. But you take it in blank and we just start filling it in. Okay, what do we know? What do we see? What are those strengths and weaknesses? We can have strengths and weaknesses in the environment too. We might want to write out, hey, they have some really great UDL pictures, right? We have a picture board up here. That's a strength that the classroom already has. And then the weaknesses in the environment. If we are going to music class, is there a weakness here that might be getting in the way of our assistive technology? Then there are tasks. So what are the things that they need to do that they're either doing well or that they're not doing? Why are we thinking that they need a tool? What can they not do? And then once we have all of that filled in, we can start looking at tools. So if I have a student who has pragmatic strengths and they're really good with social skills and they have a categorical language weakness, am I going to want to recommend Prolo, Quote-A-Go, or Cough Drop that's organized by categories, or something like Pod that's organized by social situations? So we're matching the different ways that our tools, the different strengths and weaknesses of our tools, to the strengths and weaknesses of our students. Any questions on that idea? So arguably, and we all work with districts, money is always going to be a thing. But this isn't a question for answering, but just thinking about, if we in a district say something like, well, our district is a cough drop district, that's all we have, is that person-centered? If we're just using what the district has decided is the best, right? So that is how we can use the SETT framework to help align us to, hey, this student has things that are strengths and weaknesses, and our tools have strengths and weaknesses, and how are we pairing those together effectively? Thoughts? Okay, we're moving on to a couple of other things. So if you don't have access to SETT framework, with it being a framework, like this chart isn't like the only chart. It just exists as an idea to organize. So however, like Paige talks about, the way we organize things is going to be different for each of us. So however it makes sense to you is how you can go through and organize something like this within your district to help you, especially with your new referrals and your evaluations. And there's a lot of information on Joy Zabala's website. So definitely look into that. So this is one that we haven't had a presentation on at UAT. Is anybody familiar with charting the LifeCourse? Yeah, it's great. Okay, we're gonna come to you for input on it. But so just if you scan the QR codes, this has the different pages that you can access and then use. And I want you
While
to
Bree's
tell
bringing
us.
that microphone around, I will also say, if you're online, you have questions, comments, drop those in the chat. We are monitoring that.
Yeah. Anything about it? Testimonial.
Yeah. So it's an amazing. Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. It's amazing website, and this is just like one of the graphic organizers or whatever you could. Yeah, there's tons of them. But what I think I'm a transition specialist, so what I love about it is it's really like thinking about the future, even if a student is young. And so it's kind of this idea of backwards planning. You know, I think we can't start too early about what a student's life is going to look like and how it's going to be meaningful and whatever that means for that student, but really kind of really envisioning what we want to happen and what we don't. And if we don't plan, you know, ahead and effectively, oftentimes what happens is the things that we don't want. So it's really nice to map this out. And I think we involve, you know, the whole support system of the student and all aspects of, you know, their support needs and their dreams. And so I could talk all day about it, but it's great. So no, you're great. Thank
One
you. No,
thing I
that's
love about this slide too is sometimes you'll ask people, what do you want, you know, in 5 years, in 10 years, and we have no clue. But if we ask people, what do you not want to happen to you? We have strong
know what that
opinions about
is.
that, and that can get us started on thinking about, you know, sometimes we
I-
have to go in backwards to figure
Yeah.
out what we really want.
Yeah, so I hadn't known about this at the time that I was working with SR, but this is exactly what I wish I had had to talk about with him to make that more informed choice, because we talked about this informally, but having it to where we can write it down is so helpful. Being able to say, okay, because then when I asked SR, what are your goals? You know, he's like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, do you want a job? Do you want to be able to work independently at a job? Do you want to make money? Do you want to live independently? It is great for those transitions. And again, like Robert said, the things we know are the things we don't want. So we can start there and then work to, okay, so if I know that I don't want to be homeless, then I know I need a job or I'll have to live with my family for the rest of my life, you know, then we can start talking through, okay, so here's where that benefit is for you, so that we can start to see how the tools are helpful. So sorry, I didn't know your name, but what was it? Lavinia. Like Lavinia said, there's multiple things. So the STAR is another good tool to use. And again, these are all explained on the Charting the Life course website. But we use the different areas to say, okay, what supports do we have and what supports do we need? So what community-based supports do we have? And again, we're looking at strengths and weaknesses and then matching the needs to the tools, right? But we have to have all of this information before we decide what the tool is, if we're truly going to make sure that this is centered to the person we're working with. Any other thoughts or questions about Charting the Life course? Okay. This one's for you.
Okay, yeah, I've been thinking about Ty this whole presentation. Again, thinking about, you know, parents have an idea about what their children can and cannot do. And sometimes they need to be surprised to see, oh, they can do more than I expected. So Ty had a very complex body, did not allow him to do a whole lot other than kind of move his eyes and smile. And so the best system that we could come up with for him to be autonomous was partner-assisted scanning. If you're not familiar with partner-assisted scanning, the idea there is we have an array of choices that you can make, a system, and then a partner helps you scan through those choices. Usually it's category-based. Maybe POD can be used in partner-assisted scanning. A lot of apps can be set up this way. But he would smile or kind of look up to say yes, and his response was no response at all meant no, and then you moved on to the next. And this is how he would choose everything from what books he wanted to read, what music he wanted to listen to, who he wanted to work with, things like that. We'd scan through. In middle school, he had an amazing SLP. Thank you. Who worked with him to develop a presentation about him. And then they actually delivered that presentation in a gen ed classroom. She worked with him to figure out his answers as best she could and as best he could. Obviously not perfect when you have a very complex body. And then she recorded his answers on a step-by-step voice output switch. And so this was his thoughts, her words on the device, and then he went in class and he would hit the switch with his head to activate to the next one. So that's pretty cool, right? But the best part about this that we did not see coming is we got permission from mom to post this video on, we had a different YouTube channel at the time. And before the district made me shut it down for Anyway, but we put it up there, and mom, she gave us permission to show it, but she hadn't seen it yet. And when she watched it, she thought, oh my goodness, this is my tie. I didn't even realize. And after that, she actually got him his own Facebook account. She had an increased emphasis on communication in the home, all because as she realized there was more to this person than she realized before. And that's one of the strengths that we can do, one of the superpowers we can bring is doing that.
Perfect. So kind of, we're going to start wrapping some things up. This is our what will you do next? You know, what can you think of people that would benefit from this? What will you use? How will you implement the tools? Does anybody want to share any thoughts or things that came to them as they're doing this? We can share. We can keep talking, you know, for a few more minutes, but.
What I would love for you to do here is to write something down, to set an intention, basically, so that your hour you spend here doesn't just stay here. So as you've been thinking about someone or something someone you need to work with, something you need to do, something you can change, please make a note of that somewhere so that when you go back to your district, you'll remember that and you'll remember to act on that. So take a second if you want to share that with us, because you know, sometimes we need to publicly declare it in order to follow through. That's what we're here for, but please set an intention.
Give a few.
Does anyone want to share anything? We got one over here. I'm coming.
I think when I have IEP meetings with families and they're so lost at even at high school level, they're like, we don't know what we're going to do with our child when they're over 22 or whatever. I want to see if I can take some of those life span charts or see if we can work picture your child like when they're 40 and like what kind of life do you want them to be living? What do you see them doing? And then just kind of work backwards, because I think that can help guide IEP goals. It can help guide what I do as a speech therapist. I mean, I really try and focus on self-advocacy when they finally, you know, when they're at that age. But I think maybe working in some of those to like kind of walk the family through, because I don't know, sometimes I'm surprised a little bit that when they get to like their senior year and these families really haven't thought a whole lot other than my child's going to turn 18 and I need to get guardianship.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yep. That's when they start panicking, right? Oh no.
And if they're not on the DSPD waiting list, we're like panicking for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it could kind of help them look more towards the future.
Yeah. I think that's a great point that we should make. In being person-centered, we still have a team, right? And so it's not, you know, hey, I'm the professional, so I'm filling out the charting the life course for you. We sit down, we can take these things into those team settings and say, okay, team, all of us together with the student, let's help them work through it. Let's hear them and also help us know, you know, who's going to decide this? How are we going to do that? Fill those out together, because that can also help with parents. You know, parents also need to start thinking about, because then they can help their child think about, okay, where are we going with this? And being person-centered and allowing those person-centered choices can just be small things like what Holly mentioned about being able to choose when you use your device where. It can be things like I've had some students who choose their own grid size. You know, we put a grid size on and then I'll come in and the teacher says, oh, they changed it. They wanted less. Hey, I might think they need more, but they chose less. Am I good? Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
I have 2 high school students that they can use their device to communicate like the essentials and stuff like that. But when they're in school, they don't want it. They don't want to use it. And I'll use mine and model conversations and stuff, but they, you know, and so what do I do? You know, other than I'm sitting in there in science class and modeling that vocabulary and trying to do the best I can. But, you know, that's their autonomy or that's their choice. And I, for sure, am not going to be like, you will use this. You have to use this. But it's very difficult for me to, parents are like, well, we want you to do this and we want him to use this at school. And I'm like, but he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
For
and it
many
does.
reasons. Maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they just don't want to use it. I don't know.
It gets tricky. Anybody have thoughts before we venture out? We'll come out and then Robert and I can give thoughts after audience. There's that corner too.
This may be oversimplistic, but in OT, there's, and maybe in other fields, plan failure. So if you can create a scenario where they realize it doesn't work without access to that, and again, I don't know if that sparks any ideas, but creating a scenario where it's like, you need this, so that they're like, oh, wow, I realize that this has an impact in my life. I can't do it without that.
So I'm not a teacher. I'm in voc rehab. So this is just my personal thought on this. But interacting with the school districts as a voc rehab counselor, talking about those services, one of the things that I've seen and understood is that sometimes the student doesn't want to use those devices because they are embarrassed, because it sets them apart.
Yep.
But my thought is, and wonder is if somebody that is in that same class, who is a peer, who is using that as well, rather than setting them apart, they're being a part of. And so I don't know if that helps to make them or allow them to feel included rather than secluded from the rest of the group. And so I just wonder, having other people using that, because I know that all the teenagers at school are using their phones to text. It's just we don't see it because it's not vocalized or out in the open in the class because it's not appropriate. So I just wonder if that, including them with their peers in that type of sense.
Yeah. Universal design is one of the greatest things that we can do, and also one of the hardest things to convince everybody to do, right? It's expensive, it's hard, but if we can, and maybe we can't start with the whole class, but maybe we can start with their friend, maybe we can say, hey, can we get a few kids on this? Can we do something to incorporate it to where it's more normalized? Because again, the more socially aware we are, the harder it's going to be to feel different. Holly.
While she's coming back, I'm blanking on the name right now, the lady who designed Pod.
Linda Burkhart.
Yeah. It was the Australian lady. Linda was the...
Gail Porter. Gail Porter.
Yeah, Gail Porter told a story about how she worked with little kids and then watched them grow to be adults. And she got invited to a party once where a lot of the people there were her former students who had communication systems, and about half of them used it and half of them didn't. And she wondered, well, why would you come to a party and not bring your communication system? So she started asking around afterwards, and the biggest response she got was they said, well, I thought I was going to a party. I didn't think I was going to have to work.
Yeah, I did research a couple years ago on system abandonment, and it's really interesting to look into the research and the reasons for that. But the comment I had was the comment I had was about I think too, with the student, I think too, we can leverage tools that everyone uses. So like, it's so critical. We all know this. I'm probably preaching to the choir for kids that are AAC users or adults to know how to read and write. Because then they can text their friends, and that's something that everybody does. And word predict is pretty powerful if you can get the first couple beginning letters. And then also emojis. Like, I use emojis with my students and they love emojis, and like everyone likes emojis or GIFs. I know they're not as cool anymore, but like there are tools that everyone uses with that universal design that can be used like AAC.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone loves to text, right? So like, hey, voice to text. Not everybody has the great articulation for that, but word prediction. More of those things are becoming available in multiple things. So we don't have to give a specific app. We can just say, hey, here's your computer that does these things. And then we can have lessons on, hey, whole class, this is how you can use word predict. And we all use it. And it's great. Yeah. Yes.
Anything else? We're happy to talk to you afterwards.
I have our emails. Sorry. Emails if you have other questions.